we did like 2 years of work of the startup questions too, so that we wouldn't have to do 2 years of work after that. You know what I mean?
Butterscotch.
Hey everybody, welcome to episode 491 of Coffee with Butterscotch, the game dev comedy podcast of Butterscotch Shenanigans. I'm Seth and I'm the Gaines programmer.
I'm Adam and I'm the I don't know. I try to think of a pun here, can't do it. I'm just the miscellaneous programmer. That's all I got.
I'm Sam and I'm the artist.
Whoa.
And this is a show.
Oh, yeah.
This is a show where I throw everybody off by changing my intro for the first time in decades. And also, this is a show where we talk about life, business, and working in the games industry. And today's October 25th, 22x4. And before we get started, we have a warning. There's going to be profanity in this show. And we'd also like to thank our recurring supporters over at moneygrab.bscotch.net, whose money we have grabbed. Thank you so much. All right, so we got a lot of things to talk about today. So, and we might even answer a question. So let's
Don't get ahead of yourself.
Let's get in there. Yeah, that might is doing a lot of heavy lifting there.
Yeah.
All right, so Sam's got some kind of existential horror story that I feel like it's October. It's
Halloween.
spooky.
Okay. Yeah.
So what's going on?
So my firstborn, which is a weird thing to be
Your
able to say.
firstborn.
Well, I upset my firstborn. We're doing bath time last night, right? And she's like, she's more than a year and a half at this point. So she's got her wits about her somewhat. She can talk quite a bit. And she's just discovering stuff every single day, right? And every so often she'll have a reaction to something that she's discovered that sort of is just very confusing and amusing, but you got to lock it down because she's in a moment of panic. And this happened last night in the bath. We're sitting there, put her in the bath, and some lint comes off of her from her clothes that she's been wearing during her day. So it's floating around. Mm-hmm. She points at it. She's like, "What this?" And I'm like, "Well, some lint. It just comes off your clothes." I pick some up, show her, and then just, throw it out of the tub. And then she's like, "Touch? Can I touch?" And she tries to grab some, but of course, moves away. So then I'm like, "Yeah, it's kind of hard to get though." So I show her how to kind of scoop it out.
Because of water, how water does work. Yeah.
So I scoop it up, show her, and then throw it out. And then she looks down, and there's a bigger piece of it floating toward her, and then it touches her belly. And she's like, no,
She's like, I wanted to touch it, not it touch me. What
it
the
had
fuck?
like full-on terror response.
Do you think
we
that's
just
kind of
had
the
to,
same
wrap it up?
response as like if you're like swimming in a lake or something, and then like a piece of algae touches, like a
I think
kelp
it is.
thing touches your leg, and you're like, "Whoa, what was that?" Right?
Yeah, I can't even blame her because no one likes being touched by
Unknown
something.
things touching you while you are in water is like an existential dread thing that I think runs really deep.
It does.
In the human
It
psyche.
also makes sense that when you haven't seen anything before, that even though the water is crystal clear, and a thing touches you, that's
be
like
anything.
the equivalent of as an adult when you're in murky water.
That's right. It's true. It's true.
Yeah. When you're a baby, you're in permanent murk. You know, just, you don't know
perma-murk.
what's going on around there. Yeah, I mean that's pretty spooky.
It is, honestly. And then she asked
Did she
later-
recover? Is she doing okay?
It took her like 10 minutes.
Do you have one of those silver blankets that you can put on her? Like
disaster
if a
victim?
trauma response?
Yeah. So I wrapped her up in foil,
Uh-huh.
and then we talked about how it's not a bug. It's not alive. It's not trying to get her. It's just sort of,
That is also the thing
Just
about
an
lint,
inanimate
is
thing.
it always looks like bugs.
yeah, it kind of looks like a bug. So I was like, I understand. I understand. It is spooky, but it's funny to see these things she'll be totally curious about them, interacting with them. And then something about how they like approach her or seem to move of their own accord or else. And she's suddenly like, fuck, this thing is alive and it's trying to
Confidence
get me.
is instantly gone.
Yeah, it's great.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's good to meter your curiosity with terror. Sometimes you get too close.
They are
And
bedfellows.
You learn
It
too
sounds
much.
like she needs some pet bugs.
It
sounds like it's
Does
time.
it sound like that?
Yeah, because you
Yeah,
gotta,
it does sound like
you
that.
gotta get desensitized. I mean, and the same way that we did growing up is we got quickly desensitized to like all
That's
this
true,
stuff
that's true.
because we were just like, just holding them. You just play with bugs all the time. And I have noticed that as I've gotten older, I've become like resensitized to stuff. That,
Oh yeah, same. I don't want to go out in nature anymore because it's gross and things keep getting on
They're
me.
always touching me and biting you, but like even like all the way up through like high school and even college and stuff, like when we would come back home to the country, and I would I didn't care if I was being stabbed by thorns. I didn't care if I was being bitten by bugs. I would just go pick up spiders and move them somewhere.
Part of the whole
just
shtick
didn't
when
matter.
you go swim in the pond is you dive down to the bottom and just pick up a bunch of mud.
Pull up that
and bring it
muck. Yeah, I can't
God
imagine.
knows what's in there.
I can't imagine doing that today.
Yeah. Just or even just like walking through like barefoot through a muddy shoreline, you know?
Yeah, no,
Like,
I don't want to do that.
just did it like every day
Yep.
back in the day. Now I'm a weakling.
Now you're like, something
I
might
can't
poke
do
me
it.
though.
So, yeah, I might get a leech on me, and then what happens?
And then
I'm
I
just
think
pull
it's
it
like,
off. Who gives a
I
shit?
think you gotta get desensitized early to like prevent it from being a really deep sort of pit, you know. But it is still the case if you don't continuously kind of like desensitize yourself to this stuff. Then I think I think like all that stuff kind of like inherently wants to be there, you know. So so I think
it's a healthy
a praying mantis as a pet. I think that's
I mean, I don't disagree.
There's
There's
a good starter pet.
There's this great like tree or like gardening shop that we drive by every so often, and they have a sign up front. And every time we drive by, it's a different sign. And it's always like the craziest shit. And the other day it was literally, 1,000 praying mantis eggs.
Yeah.
And I was like,
that's a good amount.
I'd stop. That is a stopping sign where you're like, wow, I didn't think I needed praying mantises, but now I can get 1,000 of them.
Yeah, every year I reconsider because you can buy 1,000 praying mantis eggs for like $50 or something. It's like,
crazy.
They're basically free.
Why do you
ladybugs?
need 1,000? I don't know.
Yeah,
I'm a little taken aback by the volume.
A lot of
here.
it
It's all
is
pest
eat.
control,
That's the problem.
Yeah.
So it's
well,
like
they eat each
most of
other
them,
as they
then
get born.
Oh yeah,
you end up with like one big praying mantis per
I
bag.
don't. Yeah. So when
super
people are like,
mantis.
I don't understand why the larger one doesn't simply eat the smaller ones, and praying mantises are like, yeah,
we
exactly.
just do
Like
that.
that. Yeah,
Yeah.
agreed.
Yep.
Why don't you just do that?
Yep.
People always say it about John Fetterman, like, I don't understand why the largest senator doesn't simply eat the smaller ones. Wait, is he a senator or is he a rep? I can't remember. Either way, he's a big dude.
Big dude.
All right. Well, I have a pretty funny story this week. Something that I sort of like duped myself in this stupid way. Okay. So, I was looking for some new music, just looking around, and I'm using like Spotify recommendations and like Panda, like different things that do like kind of algorithmic surfacing and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
The old like, if you liked this band, you might like these other bands. And I'm listening through, and then like this one song pops up, and the song's called Frosty by the band Kunzite, which is in all caps, which is also the name of a gem or something. And if you Google it, all you get is the gem, and you don't really get the band. And
It's hard to compete with that SEO of rock.
Gem. Yeah.
The gem, yeah. And I'm listening to this song, and I was like, wow, this goes hard. Like, this song really speaks to my soul, And so I'm jamming to it. I'm like, I wonder what else these people have, And so I pop open this album that they have called Visuals, and it just has this familiarity to it, where like every song name is like one word.
In caps,
like
probably.
In caps, yeah. It's like Jupiter or like PLN is one of their there's just songs with just like one word titles, that don't really mean much, and then it's got like this really specific instrumentation, and I was like, wow, this band has such RATATAT vibes. Like RATATAT is easily one of my top favorite bands of all time. And they just have like this really bizarre vibe where like sometimes they'll splice in little like audio clips of like somebody talking, and like, but not in a way that even like integrates with the song, but somehow it's still like
it all
adds. And they have this like specific way of having like piano integrated and like weird synths and guitar, and it's just a vibe that you just kind of don't.
It's hard to get.
You just don't hear it anywhere else. So I'm listening to this Kunzite, and I'm like, wow, I think I found a new favorite band. Like, it's so much like RATATAT, and I didn't think there was anybody else who could come close.
RATATAT hasn't put anything out for.
RATATAT hasn't put anything out for quite a long time, because I thought, I think RATATAT's done, and so I'm just vibing. I'm just jamming to this band.
You're like, what luck?
all week, just having the time of my life, And then this morning, I was like, I wonder what did happen to RATATAT, because like maybe they have something. So I started looking up RATATAT, and I'd be like, oh yeah, RATATAT reformed recently under the new name Kunzite. I'm like, what the fuck? My new favorite band is my old favorite band.
It
It's
snuck up on you.
Pretty impressive for them that they can essentially become the top 2 favorite bands of their entire fan base. You know what I mean? That's
and it's different. Like the new band. Like I think they have some different people involved. But the instrumentation, it still has like very strong Ratatat vibes, but it's also like pretty funky now. Like there's a lot of like fat beats in there, and they have vocals in there, which they never had before. So there's lyrics and stuff, and it's still kind of like incomprehensibly weird. It's kind of like if like a synth and an electric bass somehow could take acid. I feel like that's kind of what like this band is like. But check them out. I mean, they go pretty hard. So, but that was just like a hilarious realization of just thinking I was listening to a different band all week, and it was the same fucking
one.
band.
I remember the first songs I heard by them. I can't remember the name of it, but it has an audio clip where it's just some like, it sounds like some kind of, I don't know, like backwoods woman beat, and she's just like gonna knock me brace. Neck brace. Knock me around, hit me with a baseball bat. Like that's like
and then the music just flips into just the wildest shit, and there's like birds. They have a lot of birds in their older albums. Bird sounds. Don't know why. But, and I think they even have like a bird as one of their album covers. Sometimes their songs just like fade into like woodland noises.
I wonder if it's one of those things where it's like, because people get their inspirational in all sorts of places for making music. But if you think about, it feels like jams, like a game jam context to me, where it's like they'll take a audio clip of a random piece of an interview or something from someone,
and just
and then they're like,
spin the vibes of that into a song somehow.
Just take that and it's pretty impressive.
Yeah,
and also
choose a thing as the theme, and then you just start slapping stuff together.
Yeah. And like what I always liked about Ratatat was kind of that, where it felt like I started listening to them when I was starting to learn how to make games, and a lot of their songs feel like they would work really well as like game soundtracks.
Oh yeah.
You know, but they kind of just like, it feels like they're just having fun making the song. And then if they have an interesting idea in the middle of a song, then the song just goes that direction now. You know? But in a way that somehow still you just like, oh yeah, fuck yeah. Like I didn't see that coming, but I'm on board. Let's keep going. You know?
Yeah, there's not much of a cookie cutter approach, I guess, for their stuff. It's very
which is why I was like, I wish there were more bands like this. And that's why I was so psyched when I found a new band like this, and it's the same band. So.
It's also that's a hard thing to pull off, right? Because it's one of my favorite things, like probably anybody's favorite things when you're consuming some piece of media, is when you can tell that the person who created it was having a good time making it, right?
Yeah.
But finding that balance of like you as the creator just kind of like doing your thing and having fun, and creating something that is like digestible and makes sense to the audience is like, that's a hard, and there's some artists we really celebrate who go real hard into doing whatever the fuck they want and just create eclectic weird ass shit, but like manage to create a community around that, right? But most of the time,
it doesn't work out
successfully. And like there's a book series. It was like The Locked Tomb or something. I can't remember what it is, but it's the first of the books is like Gideon the Ninth, I think, is the first book. By what's her name? Tamsin something Tamsin. I don't know, but it's one of my favorite like series. It's very weird, and it's like this like kind of far future, maybe alternate universe, sort of like sci-fi-ish.
There's like necromancy and shit.
It's like necromancy is like the core like magic and sci-fi system. So it's a very weird setting it's not today, right? But the main character is like a person from this very moment, you know, who is also making like jokes that are like pop culture references to today, right? So it's like a thing that shouldn't work.
It's almost like a fourth wall break, because like you as the reader know what they're talking about, but nobody else should.
And it's like very colloquial, like So like it doesn't make any sense, but in the context of like the whole story and like how it all is told and stuff, it ends up just being fun for most readers. There are some readers who are like they can't handle it. It's too weird and
too weird.
It makes too little sense to have those things go together. But for like the readers who are really into it, they're just like, fuck yeah, this is like my jam, because you could just tell that the author is just having a good time and
this is
not worrying too much about like, did this make sense for me to tell this joke right now? You know, it's just like, yeah.
Well, yeah. This is how I feel about One Piece. Like when I watched the One Piece live action, where I was like, I kept trying to make it work in terms of like for example, I'm like, okay, is this like in medieval times? Like there's pirates, there's boats, there's a lot of ships, but then people are wearing like fucking cool, like modern sunglasses and there's like electric lights, and then like people have cell phones, but the cell phones are snails, and like things. It kind of kept getting more and more unhinged until finally I just had to accept that this is its own thing.
Yeah,
I shouldn't be trying to put it into
unhinged.
a box.
It is true though. Like, there's a way to go beyond consistency where you reach.
Well, it's still internally consistent. It's just not consistent with anybody else's.
Yeah, but the reality is like getting someone to follow you deep enough into that. Right.
Yeah.
For them to get so far in that they can't see back out. That's the trick, right? You have to somehow get all the way in so they can't see back out. Because as soon as you can see back out, it ruins it. But like if you can stay in that little bubble where it's just chaos, then it all works. That's the tricky part.
Yeah. So like check out that band. Also check out One Piece.
And check out whatever that book was that I can't remember the name of, but I think I gave enough clues that you could do. I think Gideon the Ninth is. I think the first book.
If it's not Googling that, we'll find it. So
yeah, you'll get there. But I highly recommend. Very fun, but also it's surprising as you start reading it. But if you, I think, and I've tried it myself because there are certain things that like definitely like kick me out of media when those kinds of things happen. When there's like too much. When I'm having to buy into a lot of stuff,
too soon,
too soon. And I've been trying to do just a better job of being like, let me just kind of meet this thing where it's at first.
Just let the storyteller kind of
let him cook,
take you on a journey. Let him cook.
just see where we end up, and then like try to judge it based on the overall experience more than like getting kind of sucked into these details, And it's been a dramatic improvement to my media consumption.
I believe they call it the willing suspension of disbelief.
Yes.
Yeah, I always struggled with it. Oh, yeah.
It's difficult, but again, it's also it is up to the author or the singer or whatever. Like it's up to them as well to do their part to help you get there, you know. And some do a better job than others.
Yep.
So otherwise this week we've been doing a lot of wild shit in the studio, working on Crashlands 2 stuff. One of the big things is a controller support overhaul and mobile controls overhaul. So nobody has really seen the mobile controls yet because we did a closed sort of like internal alpha last fall.
But that was only Steam, wasn't it?
Correct.
It was just Steam, yeah. So no mobile stuff with that.
We had the controller support at that point, though, right?
Oh, it had controller support. Yeah, the game was fully playable with controller, but it was built for keyboard mouse at the time.
Well, I guess
as kind of like the primary like starting point, and so you could do everything with a controller, but it was more like you're using the controller to pretend like you're using a mouse, right? Like you use the joystick to steer a cursor around, and like you hit A to click on stuff, and it's just kind of clunky, like steering that cursor around is just not great.
Yeah. Well, I want to mention, like, it was interesting is that from our playtesters on the Steam side, we did have, I think like 30% of them or so played with the controller either at one point or for the duration of the test. And what's really interesting about that is that we talk a lot about the finishing work associated with game dev and how a lot of it is not in any way the like cool part, the fun part. Necessarily.
You're not like telling a story. You're not like coming up with some cool new character. It's just like, I just need this button to do this thing.
And this thing happens where, in our case with the controller support, the three of us don't play console games very often. So I probably play them the most, I guess.
Yeah, I think so.
I guess Adam, you play on your Steam Deck quite a bit. But
it wasn't until I started playing on Steam Deck that I was like, because if I basically don't have to use a controller, then I won't. It's kind of right.
So they should call it the Steam Neck because my neck fucking hurts every time I use that thing for more than 30 minutes. That's true.
Yeah. But so the tricky part then is like the experience that maybe we would have where we're like, oh yeah, this is certainly good enough, right? For controller support is basically typically more related to like gameplay stuff. In other words, can I run around? Can I fight? Can I like do all the stuff that I want to do in moment to moment experientially, right? But when it comes to like UIs and stuff, you'll see this in a lot of games where the interactions with UIs, even with a controller, are cursor based. And the reason is that it's very easy to just have that up and running. It's almost like instantly because you're already
using a mouse. You just click on something.
Well, it also is almost the same for touch, right? Because like the thing you lose with touch controls is hover so that you can't display information on hover. But otherwise, it's like what touch and mouse have in common is essentially that you can just teleport like from
location.
You just basically instantly have a location you want to interact with, and you just are interacting with it now. That's
you move your hand a quarter of an inch, and now your cursor's across the screen.
Right. The tricky part then with where the controller support was at the time of the demo was that it was in that place where very playable as far as like the game aspect, the whole loop, like go out, fight stuff, harvest things, come back, talk to people, whatever. But when it came to like navigating the menus, like selecting the crafting menu, right, which is again part of the loop, but like selecting then a particular recipe within the crafting menu, you got to drive your cursor over there with the joystick. And because that experience, like driving a cursor around, is a janky one, it's a hard one. It's just like, it's not, there's no good way to do it, I guess, is short. There's better ways, but there's no.
It works, but at what cost?
Yeah. Then what was so fascinating, and the reason we decided to actually take another crack at this was because one of the few like negative pieces of feedback we gotten from the demo, as well as in the internal alpha, was this running commentary from a very small selection of controller users. So again, we're talking about I think it's like a third of people maybe who played it with a controller, and then like a small chunk of them,
like a third of the third,
who were really mad about how that cursor worked in the in-game menus, like the fact that you couldn't
not even how it worked, just that it was there.
That it was there.
Like, there's no good way to make it work. It's just it's a cursor that you steer around. Yeah.
So that was
they were mad the same way that I'm mad when I play like a AAA title that was clearly designed console first, where there are things that I'm like that just should work way better with a keyboard and mouse that don't.
Yes.
So I get it from the PC gamer side of like how. So it's an understandable thing. Yeah.
Oh yeah, it's one of those things where it's I get it, but I think it's one of those things where when we talk about again finishing a game and what does it really mean, and a lot of the stuff we talk about internally is identifying those items that while you might be okay with how it operates, right? Mm-hmm. That there's going to be essentially an unnecessary kind of a negative response to what is not actually the game, right? But is
in your mind, but
in your mind, but is essentially like one of the layers of interaction with the game. So whether that's like touch controls are janky, whether it's you have controller support, right? So you're saying you have controller support, so I'm using a controller, but then when I go to navigate menus, it's just annoying. Like there's all these things like that where you kind of have to clean
It just
up.
kicks people out.
It kicks people out. And also like
to me, it's like the gaming equivalent of paragraphs, right? Like if you wrote a great story and just didn't fucking break it apart into paragraphs, people would hate it.
Yeah. Or
right? Like nobody would want to read it because like all the text is the same. The text is there. The story is amazing.
Yeah.
But you're asking people to put up with a bunch of bullshit and do a lot of extra mental work to extract the experience.
Yeah.
Just because you haven't done the work to just make it more readable.
Yeah. Or it's like the case where, like you buy something and it's like encased in that extremely resilient, sharp plastic.
Oh, yeah.
For some it's one of those things.
I love buying scissors because you need scissors to open the package.
Right? So there's stuff like that where it's like, again, it's not the thing in the sense that it's not the scissors that are in the package, right?
It's not the thing that you're thinking of as the most important part when you're developing it or creating it, but it doesn't matter that you don't think it's important, because it's extremely important.
Right. So we basically always toward the end of dev, we try to identify those things where it's like, okay, what's the thing that we've essentially kind of ignored or decided wasn't maybe a thing we were going to worry about too much that actually will just like have enough of a negative impact on even a small portion of player base that it would essentially, I guess I don't know, but like unnecessarily dampen the total response, right? Where it's like if you take, again, if it's a third of your players play the controller and then like a third of them and then probably like a third of them who would get pissed off about it, right? It's not that many people in total, but it's enough. It's enough. Mm-hmm. And it's not that you're even arguing that it wouldn't be better if you took care of this issue, right? That's never the argument, because it's always a priority problem and a time problem. Then it's kind of just like, okay, let's just like rip that bandit. Let's just do this so that when the game is out and launches or else, that this kind of a complaint, which is almost like to me like the most boring kind. Like
if
I love
people
the ones where
hate the game, we want them to hate the game.
Exactly. Yes.
Like we want people to be mad at us for the right reason.
100%. And like I'm okay with the feedback on like design stuff wherever else. People are like, oh, I hate this thing. Because there's always other people who are like, I love this thing. You know what I mean? Like that's always happening.
Yeah, you don't want a part of the game that at best people tolerate.
Or no, if people defending something that you don't want their defense to be, it's not that bad.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's what I mean.
That's not good.
Yeah. You want every aspect of the whole product to be something that if people are mad about it, it's because of personal preference. It's because of that kind of thing.
And oftentimes that there's other people who are equally into it.
Yeah.
Right?
People who like it.
Yeah.
Or they see the point. Like, oh yeah, I don't like that you can do blah, but
basically if everybody agrees, it's like, yeah, the devs just didn't do a good job of this. Like, and that's the agreement. And then there's nobody to defend you amongst, it's not good. It's not good.
So we're kind of, that's the decision-making process, I guess, to get us to the point where it's like, okay, let's take a crack at that whole thing that we've never done before, which is like D-pad interaction stuff. And keep in mind, like Levelhead, we didn't have it. I'm pretty sure we still don't have it in there for like.
I mean, Levelhead was kind of a weird beast because it had this editor, right? And like you can't really get away with not having a cursor.
Yeah. So it had a different sort of a thing going on, I guess. But yeah, it's again, I don't know. There's all this finishing work that is just so interesting to me on the game side, because the question's like, why? Like, why spend the game's not done yet, right? It's like, why spend any time prioritizing?
Well, but because I think it's a question of what is done, right? Because if you spend a bunch of time developing like really, really sophisticated controller support integration into all the different menus of the game, while those interfaces are rapidly changing and being redesigned all the time, then you're just wasting a bunch of time, right? Like you want to be taking controller support into account.
Yeah, exactly. Because it depends on also the cost of doing it, right? Because if part of what's happening is you're also iterating on a better way to like just handle controller support, so it becomes less of a problem, then that extra upfront cost of like having it be part of the whole thing can end up being worth it. But if it's always really expensive because of like the tools or whatever to do that, then you don't want to go all the way to the end of that. And you rarely want to, you just don't want to go all the way to the end of polish most of the time in early development.
While things are being ripped out.
Yeah, you need to get to the point where it's like this captures what we're trying to do and then doesn't get in the way, right?
Yeah. It's like a kind of an interesting example there is so Crashlands 2 has this like research system where there's multiple ways to progress through the game, and one of those ways is through these things called insights, where you can research new recipes or new types of things that happen in the world or whatever. And at the beginning, it was actually like a tree, like a node, connected node display, where you would have like a research node, and you would, you'd select that node on like a visual map, and then you would have like a tooltip that would explain what that would unlock. And then you could see the things that it's going to connect to or lead to. And this tree was like pretty sprawling. Even early on, we had like, 50 things in that tree. And it just like all these little nodes kind of mapped out and weaving out from each other. And so, when we're looking at that thing, it's like, well, if we tried to like hook that thing up to a D-pad or whatever, I don't know.
It was already hard to do with a full, like just easy mouse keyboard, up, down, left, right, just like click, drag, move the thing, whatever. Like, and it was already unwieldy.
Yeah. And so like that doesn't exist anymore. We've gone through probably like 3 or 4 different iterations of some of the like the main interfaces of the game, crafting, research, stuff like that.
Yeah, that research one in particular was the one that we did, I think, the most. Because that was also the new one, so it kind of makes sense,
Yeah, it was this new concept, and now it's actually it's just an easily simple, navigable list that's very easy to understand, and it works super well with a D-pad now. But like if we had spent a bunch of time back then trying to figure out how to make that work with a controller, and then just rip the whole thing out, then like what would have been the point of that, Yeah.
So Adam,
and also
you're definitely right. Yeah, you got to wait for a lot of these things.
You got to do, and it's a question of like, what is it that you're, because there are design problems and then there are implementation problems, and like choosing the right time for both to engage with both of those. Because with something like basically a graph of a web of interconnected nodes, and trying to figure out like at that time, if you're 100% confident you want to do that, right? Then you need to know ahead of time. You got to be like, okay, we know this is going to be a huge challenge for our controller, but we know we're going to do this, which means either you can then say, well, so let's figure out how it's going to work with controller and get that design sorted out so we can make some changes early before we like.
Yeah, you can just do simple stuff like,
we know we're going to do this anyway. Let's deal with controller later because we're going to do it later anyway, and we're ready to deal with however horrible that's going to be
Right.
months from now or whatever.
But the funny thing with that is, like, in retrospect, there actually would have been some pretty easy ways to hook that up to a controller. For example, use the right joystick to just pan around that interface, and just whatever's like at the center would be the thing that you're selecting. Mm-hmm. The real problem with that interface was that the further you got in the game, the more incomprehensible it was. Yeah. Because if you have like a central starting point and then all these research nodes kind of like emanate out from it, then all the ones that you can access will be kind of like in an ever-expanding circumference that gets bigger and bigger, and it just becomes harder and harder to see all of your options. Mm-hmm. You have to keep like panning around like across this giant tree thing. Then it's like, okay, well then in that case, you might as well just make it more like a vertical tree, like instead of like emanating outward in all directions, just make it go like down or something, like a tech tree kind of a view.
We got the same problem.
But then the same problem, which is like most of the stuff that you see on the interface is stuff that you've already researched.
Yeah.
So what is it? You can't do anything with it. What's it doing there? Mm-hmm. So, over time we ended up ripping that out, not because of controller, but just because it was dumb.
Mm-hmm. So, you can also make other decisions like say, we want it to be navigable just with the D-pad. So that means that the total number of nodes connected in either node, we're just going to branch off at 90-degree angles. Maximum, right?
Yep. Right.
But then you have another
grid.
Now you got a problem though, right? Which is that any given node can only be connected to 4 other nodes, right?
Yeah.
Which might not seem like a problem, but it always ends up being a problem at some point where it's like, ooh, we have a really hard.
It's more that it can only lead to 3 because it has to come from 1.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
So
you got to be like, is that good?
Yeah, is it okay to choose? And so this is why for me it's like
hard to say.
My approach to all of these, to this question that you're always asking of, do I design this now? Do I build this now? Right, is basically to be pretty aggressive about designing now, like and kind of lean heavily towards that, so that basically I'm choosing what my constraints are as early as possible, and like and reasoning through the consequences of those choices, so that I don't paint myself into a corner in the future. But then implement kind of as late as possible, right? Mm-hmm. And like that's the sort of general heuristic I use to try to decide like where does my time go at the whole part of development, which is basically like an early dev. It's like trying to stay design focused, but try to think out as far ahead as I can.
Yeah.
And then later on, as the constraints start to become solid and the design start to become solid, that's when now I start to lean into the implementation side.
Mm-hmm. What's that saying? It's like, very often a 2-hour meeting saves you 2 weeks of work, Mm-hmm. It's like, it's annoying to have meetings and it feels productive to just like start working on stuff.
Yeah.
But
sometimes 2 hours of work saves you 2 hours of meeting, saves you 10 hours of meetings, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
You got to try to identify where those lines are.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's been and honestly, I really enjoy this kind of work because even though it doesn't feel like working on the game, right? It's like the interface doesn't really change. It's just the buttons you push change.
I think it's because it's one of the few places actually when we're making a game where there are good, clear answers and feedback that you're doing it right.
Yeah, it can be unambiguously better.
You pick up the controller and you start doing it like, ooh, yeah, that feels so much better.
Yeah, right? Versus if we like change the progression flow like 2/3 of the way through so that this insight branches off this one instead. It's like, is that better?
You're like, all right, let me start my 100-hour playthrough again and see how that feels.
Yeah, well, and most things in like an actual gameplay experience are. It's not even a question of like, it's not even that it's unambiguous if it's better or not. It's that it's never just better.
Correct. Yep. There's always
because it's always how it hits a certain person when they go experience it, and in the final context
for the rest of the whole system.
And
right?
so everything that you do in all of game design, unless you have pretty simple games, but even there though, like almost everything you do is just it's a side grade for somebody, an upgrade for somebody else, and a downgrade for another person, right? And you're trying to design so that you're largely that the people who are then playing the game largely fall into this is better for them, this choice that I made category, but it just won't be for everybody. And when you find exceptions to that, it is just delightful to like, I mean, it's something we're talking about too on the business side of games, where it's just like, there aren't any decisions you can make that are unambiguously the right move. Or almost none, but every once in a while you just get one where you're like, fuck yes. I just like that was definitely the right choice. That was definitely the right move. And it just feels so good sometimes to get to do that,
Got a little clarity.
Hell yeah.
Oh my God. Yeah. So nice.
All right, guys, we'll get on to some questions.
Yeah.
All right. Highest upvoted question from podcast.bscotch.net comes from SapflakeIcetumble. This is a bit of a long one, so I'm going to need you guys to...
I'll block it in. I'm going to shut the fuck up.
Just hold this. Shut your mouths. Okay. All right. SapflakeIcetumble says, you guys are awesome. Been listening for 6 or 7 years now, and I appreciate your takes on life, productivity, and business. My main question is for Sam. When you're animating the art in the game, do you use spine for everything, or do you do a combo of sprite sheets with the skeletal animation? Can you talk a bit more about your animation process? Also, Seth, is one form easier to implement in code? Adam, you're great too.
Appreciate that little
nice
footnote.
little applause all around. Well, Seth, I'll let you hit the smaller question first, which is your side of it. Because I think it's your side.
Yeah. So the question basically is like, if we're doing sprite sheets, which is sort of like just frame by frame animation, where, you know, we just kind of like in code, we would choose which frame to display at different times.
We did this in Levelhead, for example.
This is like, that's how Levelhead works. Versus Spine, where Sam creates all these different animations that are not just frames, but that have durations associated with them and events, and they can like emit sounds, and there's all kinds of extra stuff that Sam can do on his end.
And then game side, there's like an interpretation engine for that data, so that Seth as a programmer basically has to make sure that engine level thing works, right? So that the interpretation of that content is like gives Seth things he can hook into. Mm-hmm. And then Seth's job then becomes like, how do I know when to like pull the trigger on the thing that like goes from this animation to that animation or whatever.
So I'd say the answer is neither is easier to implement in code. They're just different. So when it comes to frame by frame animation, the implementation of that visual asset into the game is entirely dependent on on me to uniquely program it. Yeah, if we have a new
frame
creature,
carries no data, it's just
a picture.
It's just
that's it. So there's a lot more communication that has to happen there, where Sam would compose all the frames, and then he would send me like an instruction manual, right? Here's all the frames. Here's when they need to display in these different ways. And then I would go in and look through the game code and find those different scenarios and just make sure that the proper frame is displaying under the proper circumstance.
Right. So what I mean by that is there's no layering happening here. What I mean by that is that, let's say we're talking about like GR18 in Levelhead. There's
the little robot.
If you are in like the normal base form, so you have no power up, there's like kind of 40 frames or something like that are essentially, you think about a frame is just a brief moment in time where, let's say we're looking at just like the walk. It'd be, okay, GR18's leg
is up. A frame is one
frame.
Picture. That's a moment within an animation.
So you got GR18's legs up in this one, down in this one, and then back in this next one. And so basically what I would do is I would send over then in that instructions, not just like, here's which frames do what. So not just here, first 3 frames of this walk, but it would also be cases where, because in animation, it's really important to hold things, hold certain pictures.
Hold this frame for 1/10 of a second, and then this one.
And that's like the real fiddly shit where it would be really challenging sometimes when Seth and I would work on these things, because sometimes I wouldn't give any instructions with regards to the holds, especially early, because it wasn't a thing we had really done before. And so I would see them in a game, and they'd be suddenly just so fast, like every frame per. 1 frame per picture. Because
I wasn't sure exactly what Sam wanted, so I just kind of go with like what kind of felt right for me, but then it wasn't what he was envisioning, and then we would have to kind of figure out where to meet.
Yeah, So it'd be like, okay, hold this middle frame for an extra little bit, then go to the next one. Else.
So like we're really talking about like give this like 0.05 seconds more, you know, and it's really important. Like it really changes the feel of things. All those tiny little adjustments. But again, like that's when I say one is not easier than the other, like that's not hard. Yeah, it just takes a lot of
work and a lot of collaboration.
It's a lot of work, and more importantly, it's a lot of duplicate work, because like, okay, once we've solved all of that with GR18, with animating GR18, now it's time to implement the Lizumi, which is one of the enemies in Levelhead, and it's a lizard thing that sticks out its tongue and then whips around and does a backflip or whatever, right?
Naturally, yeah.
And so that is a completely different set of frames, different set of instructions, different set of circumstances. And again, implementing any one of those frames or any one of those animations is pretty straightforward, right? It's like, okay, when this happens, show this frame. When this happens, show this frame. But it does mean that Sam cannot fully realize an asset and bring it into the game himself. He has to make the frames, hand them to me, and then once I get around to it, I'll hook it up, right? Yep. And so with Spine, it's a different workflow. So Spine is a program that allows Sam to he composes the art in a different. You use Clip Studio Paint, or is it Clip Studio now? Is it Clip Studio Paint? Yeah. So use that to create the assets, brings them into Spine, where he reassembles them into, like kind of slaps them all together. So you might have like an arm and a leg and a body and whatever.
Yeah, I think a good way to think about it is it's a blend of 2D and what's called traditional 2D animation, which is essentially frame by frame, what's happening in like level head, versus bone based animation, which is what's happening with Spine. So what I say it's a blend of them is that I'm still drawing the frames like on the Clip Studio side. I still might draw them as like a single picture, right? So in the case of Geraldine running, this is a picture of Geraldine running with leg up, leg down. What happens next is the important part, which is that instead of just exporting that and then sending that to Seth frame by frame, or putting that even just directly into Spine and setting up myself to time it out correctly, I'll break apart the body. So I'll be like, okay, this is Geraldine running, yes, but we're going to break off the arm and the leg and even the face, so that instead of just this one picture now, I actually have 4 parts that essentially, when recomposed in Spine, I'm going to lay them back on top of each other. And now we have all those parts. And now I can wiggle them. And that wiggle's super useful. It's called secondary motion, right? Which is like,
well, and you can do that you can give the animation a name, right? So you give it a name where it's like, this is the quote run animation. And then you've got a timeline with keyframes, and Sam is, when he's saying like he wiggles them, it's sort of like pose it and pose the arms and legs in these different keyframes, and he can move the timers around and stuff so that like those 0.05 second adjustments, he can just do that now. He can hit play and watch it and be like, oh yeah, this part needs to be a little faster, so he can adjust that. So then when I bring that into the game, I don't make any of those timing decisions, and I don't make decisions about when to display individual frames. Instead, I just make decisions about which animation to play. So if it's like, okay, the character's running, so we
play run.
Probably play the animation called run. And so the difficulty then for me, so like it's like, okay, that sounds so much easier on the programming side. Well, the problem is there's a lot of synchronization and a lot of like higher level work that now has to happen, so that whenever Sam makes an animation, he can just plug it into the game without me needing to do anything. Yep. Which means I have to do a lot more upfront work to build basically a system that can handle all the different types of things. So like one kind of fun example that is like such a bizarre challenge in Crashlands 2 is swinging weapons.
Yes.
Okay. So let's say you've got a sword and it's got a half-second swing, right? So during that half-second, right, Flux, whips her arm back, and then exactly at the half-second mark, that's when the damage is supposed to be delivered from Flux's attack, right? So at that half-second mark, the sword is swung and the damage is delivered. The problem is the animation can't stop there. Because of follow through. So if you ever, think about like a golf swing, right? Like imagine if the golfer like whips back and swings and they hit the ball, and then just the club just instantly stops as soon as the ball gets hit. That's insane.
Looks
right?
real weird.
Looks real weird. There needs to be a follow through.
That would be very efficient, because that means you put every
transferred all
bit of momentum into that thing.
I mean, the ball would explode like a nuclear bomb at that point. Yeah. And so to make things look natural and feel correct, the animation actually needs to extend beyond the time of the ability. And so it does. We have a follow-through section of the animation. Well, the problem here is what happens if you're swinging the sword multiple times back to back?
When do you start the second swing if you're still doing follow-through from the first swing? But also technically we need to make sure that we said that it was going to take half a second for you to do damage.
Yeah. So every swing of the sword is a half second. So like every time you deliver damage is a half second apart. Exactly. Right. And so this interesting thing, and you can see it if you watch the game. And we actually added a little cast timer to kind of help people kind of understand what was going on here, because it's like your first swing feels slower a little bit because you have you backswing, and then at the half second mark you hit, and now you're in your follow through animation. Well, let's say that follow through is a quarter of a second long, right? Like how long it takes to kind of finish it up. Well, now you've only got a quarter of a second left before you're supposed to deal damage again, because you've kind of like eaten into the the next swing's timer with the follow through animation of the previous swing. And so the next swing has to have its animation timings automatically adjusted so that the swing finishes exactly a half second after the first one finished.
But, and again, going back to this whole like quarter or like that 0.05 part of a second in a particular part of an animation will make a huge difference. If you speed up the whole thing to try to get it to match, it'll feel real fucking weird. Because again, it turns out that like certain parts of the animation do a lot of work when they are relatively held for longer or whatever else. So then you got to make this priority system. Like, okay, if we start getting short on time, we can cut from here and we can speed up here, but we cannot touch here, for example.
Yeah. So all the ability animations are broken up into these 4 chunks, and each chunk has its own rules about how it can be whether it can be truncated, meaning like chopped down, how or whether it can be sped up or slowed down to adjust, and blah blah blah. And so that was so like coming up with that was so much harder than anything we ever did in Levelhead. But once we solved it, we didn't really have to think about it that much.
Correct.
From that point
I think that's the difference. Is like the solutions in Crashlands 2 that we've developed have made it so that I'm able to basically wholesale just do the work end to end once all this, now that all the systems are up and running. But getting all the systems up and running was a whole thing because it was basically learning a whole new tech stack for myself and also for Seth actually on the like spine integration side. And even actually on Adam's side, because we were doing exporting from a different program, I had to build this whole complicated pipeline to manage that stuff, right? Because not every asset goes through spine. So you got to be able to kind of split the process. So this huge rebuild of like how we do stuff, just so that we joked about it a lot, especially like right afterwards. Because
we did like 2 years of work of the startup questions too, so that we wouldn't have to do 2 years of work after that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
and I think what's interesting too is like with some of this stuff, you can easily make the argument that you could change the constraints a little bit, right? So like with the swing or whatever else, where it's like, oh, well, then you just say that like animations don't get to have any follow through. This is actually very common in a lot of games, like fighting games and stuff like that, where the follow through of stuff will be kind of baked into the hit. So that's why you see those big smears with like just a big blade kind of going across. And that's the hit, but also the follow through. You kind of smoosh them together. And the thing is like, we did do that, but it didn't feel nearly as good as when we had a little bit of extra. And then we tried the other part, which is like just lock the player. So you can't actually start swinging again until the animation just runs its course. That's like Dark Souls style, right? Your animation battle actually. That didn't feel good. Yeah. It wasn't quite the right thing for the game. Yeah. So the place we ended up with this weird dynamic system that then we solved it and we're like, yeah, do your first play test. And people are like, how come my weapon swings so slow the first time? And it's like, well, it's actually always hitting at exactly the same amount of time.
It's kind of
but it does look like it's swinging.
But it looks like it's
because it actually, it is visually swinging faster.
The movement is slower. Yeah. So the other kind of problem there is we realized like, okay, well, using the system, we don't want to have things with too slow of a swing.
Or too fast.
Or too fast, yeah. Well, fast is fine because you can get a lot of haste in the game to a point where your character is just kind of like a machine gun, which is kind of cool. And the animation system does accommodate it. Like it still works even when it speeds up.
Because that's the other part of all this too, right? Is that you then have a higher level thing that can adjust the overall speeds and certain context and all that.
Yeah. And so what we kind of found was if we just speed up the ability, like the weapon attacks and stuff, just like a little bit by like 1/10 of a second, then they no longer feel so disconnected. Like they no longer feel quite as like weirdly slow the first time versus the second swing. And again, like it's also dumb because this thing only really applies to what the player does, because an enemy will do an attack that's a much longer attack so like, let's say like it's a creature, right? They have like a big wind up because they need to telegraph what they're about to do. They'll do the thing. They maybe like do like a chomp and they kind of like slide forward or something. And then we actually like kind of make them basically pause for
they always pause
like a half second to give the player time to do some kind of a counterattack. And so enemies don't ever chain attacks like that, like the way that the player does.
Yep. Yes.
This is only a problem for the player.
Because it's just the same every time. Yep.
Yeah. So there's so again, when the question is about like, which one is harder, nothing's ever easy in doing this kind of work.
You're choosing
it's
your problems,
just it's hard in different ways and in different paces. Some things are really hard up front, take a lot of thought work. Some things just take a lot of tedium over time.
Well, and I think
some things are hard
about it is
Okay.
Yeah, is ultimately the decision then which thing you do is not because one is like better or worse or whatever, right? It's because you're trying to balance what your constraints are. So in our case, the fact that like historically Sam was so dependent on Seth implementing the details to be able to find
and we
out.
had so much
like,
back and forth about like
so much
I wouldn't
back and
hook it
forth.
up quite the same as he wanted. You know?
So then Sam's work was then just made a lot harder because he couldn't be fully autonomous. And then Seth wasn't able to like work on other parts of the game because the stuff that Sam wanted to be autonomous anyway, Seth had to be doing. And so he at that same time couldn't be doing other stuff. Right. And so our primary motivation for Crashlands 2 for like how all this was going to work was to put autonomy on Sam as much as possible. And kind of that was actually the foundational goal and constraint that then cascaded into all of these out. And then from there though, then Sam was like learning a new way of doing things and then he started to develop the way he wanted to approach it, the art style he wanted to use, the animation style he wanted to use, the tools he wanted to use, and all that kind of stuff. But we started from that foundation of like maximum autonomy. And then we go into Sam as a kind of art director role. Like, what does he want to do? And then we go into how the fuck do we make this work right in the game?
Yeah, I mean,
but you could choose any like starting point for how that's gonna
100%. We could have also not changed it at all, right? It's just that the reality you have to confront the reality there, which is like if we could not build Crashlands 2 into like this larger scale thing. Also, like there's another artist helping out, Anne, right, who's doing a great amount of work, right, with the game. So, and she's able to fully integrate and then become fully autonomous herself because of all these systems.
Because we made the pipeline for Sam to be autonomous, but that means other people can learn that pipeline.
Yeah, which means we have
that
some
adding another
scalability.
artist, doesn't cause Seth to now be doing twice as much.
Yes, because that was
which is something that we ran into like quite a long time ago when we were working on some games before Levelhead. Was scaling up the art team, trying to get more art production, but then that just meant we also needed more programming because all of the art could only get into the game if a programmer paused what they were doing and worked on it. And I was the only game programmer. And so again, part of our Crashlands 2 sort of studio transformation is scalability, which doesn't mean like we don't need to scale, but if we change our approach and our systems so that they can scale, then if we need to plug another person into it, we can, and it's not going to just like destroy everything.
Yeah, I mean, I think the first like I guess 8 years of the studio was recognizing that Seth is a very, very strong game programmer and very fast on implementation, stuff like that, right? And
we just use that.
That was what we did. But it's like just because a person can resist being crushed doesn't mean you should
just keep crushing.
So a big part of like that was actually a big part of the transition was it happened a lot toward the end of Levelhead in particular, where there's still just so much programming work to do, but also a lot of very like hard art stuff to just implement, right? And we had a lot of these conversations trying to figure out how to debottleneck Seth, right? And so a lot of the tools we developed at the time were trying to do that in various ways, whether it was automatic importing of stuff so that they were set up properly, like naming conventions, all these things were
simple things like Sam did a bunch of work to figure out what his error rate was because a decent chunk of my work, since it was implementing Sam's art, then a decent chunk of my work became
finding errors,
identifying problems in Sam's exported art that actually wouldn't work, and then sending it back to him with instructions on how to fix it. And then I would wait, and then he would re-export it, and then I would re-import it and hook it up again, right? And so like at that time, this was part of my my DevOps talk that I gave at GDC where we talked about this stuff, is like part of Sam's way of giving me more time was just updating his own processes to be more consistent. But because of the Jevons paradox, like that just meant that he had more time to make more art. So it didn't actually change anything because everything still had to go through code at the end of the day. Yeah. So
yeah, I think we're in a much better overall position now. I think I get a lot more of the bottlenecking stress on like because like there's so much art that remains to do and actually just takes a long time. Like the animating like this is not cheap at all. Like it's
but I think
very intense.
I think I wouldn't describe it as a bottleneck, because a bottleneck implies that like other things can't happen until this thing happens.
Yeah, there's like I think a rate limiter is sort of like
it's just a rate limit. Yeah, so because like for example, we don't want to release the game until controller support is done, right? And like I'm working on that, and it's just going to take a minute, and until it's done, the game can't be done. But the same thing applies with like all the stories and the quests and everything else.
I think
we're not blocking each other.
Yeah, it's about work piling up, right? I think it's like
that's true. That's true.
Because the goal of any like complex system of moving work around, right, is that like a really good efficiency of that system basically means that when work moves from one node to another node, that it can instantly get used, right, and transform to the next part of work. And if you think of like think of like Sam's art process itself as a collection of steps, right? Then because Sam is the one carrying the thing through all of it, right? Then there's not a buildup at any point. It just goes through the system at the maximum possible rate, right? If there were other people involved, like Sam making his own art assets, then you could create some new kind of buildup inefficiencies where, you know, 3 people are gray boxing stuff. And they hand it off to the next person who then like animates something or whatever, right? And now you have to start solving a new set of problems of like, how do we make this process really efficient?
Because like bottlenecks create waiting, and nobody's waiting for anything right now.
That's
like
true.
everybody's just moving at maximum.
Well, the thing is like this is what autonomy gets you. Whether it's autonomy of a person or autonomy of like a part of a system, right? Is autonomy basically means that like you're carrying this. You are basically fully managing some piece of work from start to finish, right? And if you have full autonomy, that's basically what prevents work buildup within that system, right? And if you, so that the more autonomy you can add in different like nodes of the system, so that things can operate in parallel while being minimally dependent on each other, which is basically a systems design challenge, right? So in the case of like our stuff, it's via the game changer plus all of our pipelines and stuff. Then it doesn't matter how fast Sam makes art; it can go into the game exactly that fast, right?
Yes,
there's
true. Yeah.
That's fully
kind of
just about. Yeah.
If he was making art, say 10 times faster, then the rate at which he would be discovering bugs in the spine code,
there's a limit on all of it.
Would surpass my ability to keep it up to date, right? And
or
so
if we had
everything is balanced against, exactly. Everything's balanced against each other.
Yeah, nothing scales indefinitely, and that's why like all of this is a constant problem-solving process of trying to be like, okay, where's the new bottleneck? Where's the new thing that's like straining the whole system, and how do we go tackle that thing to maximally parallelize stuff is like basically the end goal. And so it's basically a combination of maximum parallelization and maximum autonomy is what gives you a system that is basically just moving at maximum efficiency, right? And that has to be done with a systems level design and kind of tooling.
Yeah, I will say the biggest difference now is that because it is end to end for me. Yeah, where it's like, so I'm working on this creature in the third act currently, and it's like a big yak that flies, of course, naturally. So spoilers, but we talk about it. I get like an initial design done that allows us. That was done months ago, just a single picture of the thing, and that's used in game so we are able to build out the whole world with it. We have abilities that work with it. Seth Graybox's abilities, components drop from it.
Pick a name for it so it's ready for load.
Yeah, because we know what the fuck it is, right?
Yeah,
but
you do enough to maintain autonomy and parallelization everywhere else in the system.
Exactly, and then we're able to basically move all that stuff forward and then kind of circle back on the animation side. Now that's kind of where I go from. Okay, we made the initial drawing of it. Let's get it moving, and then we know what its abilities are because we have played with them actually, right, in game. So now let's get those animated, but not just animated, but then fully up. Like sometimes you got to go tune the timings or whatever else of the ability once it's animated, oftentimes because there's feedback now happening in real time with the creature as it gets ready to attack. So
honestly, it's kind of good that we did it this way because, for example, there's something that we learned over time when working on the Crashlands 2 creatures is that every single one of them needs to have some ability that makes it move, like some attack that makes it move. If a creature just plants in one spot and just like is a turret, basically, it's fucking boring. Like it needs to kind of move around the space and
either
do some stuff.
Either like as a result of biting, you'll see the slug one slide forward, right? That wasn't originally.
Yeah, a lot of creatures will have they'll have some kind of ranged attack, whatever, but then like they'll always have some kind of like a chomp or a charge attack or something that kind of like
or some recoil
sends them or a leap or what, like something that sends them to a new location, you know, because it moves the combat space around, right? And it's like, well, because we implemented all of the creatures, and left a lot of them on pause for the animations while Sam was working on other stuff, then we were able to kind of like refine their combat abilities and stuff without wasting a lot of Sam's art time having to like make animations for abilities that turned out to not be good. Right. So yeah, it's like it's all working.
What was the
It's
second?
just a matter of time.
What was the second part of the question that was directly for me? Just want to make sure I got that part.
It was just, do you use Spine for everything, or is it a combination of sprite sheets and Spine?
I see. Yeah. So I think as far as the for everything, this is kind of where the magic of Adam's like Sprightly exporter, which is part of our Stitch package, you can get on VS Code.
It is open source and available for people who are into this sort of thing. It's specific, It
is specific. You have to set it up, but like Stitch is basically the tool that Adam built to manage shoving art in particular in.
I should make a video about how to use the art pipeline in Stitch, because also we always forget how to use it. So anytime something goes wrong, like me and Sam both have to be like, oh, fuck. And then go like, do a deep dive through everything.
Because it's all automated, so we don't think about it.
I should probably do that.
But basically there's still just singular, sprite exports that come out. So in other words, if we're looking like a UI icon for a thing, right? If it's like, oh, here's a bomb. Okay, there it is. We have code in game that lets us put that picture then into Flux's hand, right? But it's not, previously everything was attached inside of the Spine file, but we got around that. So basically there are just regular sprites stacked up in there.
Yeah, just a picture. Just a single picture.
Mm-hmm. There's also some that are actually sprite sheets, right? So let's say a fence. It's actually like a sprite called a fence and has 3 pictures in it. So that's like your sprite sheet, which is like the fence oriented this way, that way with a post, as an example. And then on Seth's side, he does have to code up particular ways to handle those things, right? And then there's Spine stuff. So Spine stuff is basically for anything that we really want to move. So just about every resource is in there. Every creature's in there. Anything that moves basically is in there. Anything that is static or that needs like more of a programmatic edge to it because of something, where it's like a fence, goes usually through sprite sheets. So we use all of them, I guess, but they all originate in Clip Studio the exact same way. It's just that when you go to that export process, are you just exporting it directly where you're like, hey, GameMaker, just eat this, and Stitch shoves it in. And that's in which case it's just a sprite sheet. Or are you saying, hey, GameMaker, don't even look at this yet, which we have little commands for, and then picking it up on the Spine side, doing a bunch of shit there, and then exporting that file, and then GameMaker eats that. And that's kind of how you put it together. So
yeah.
Yeah.
So it's like, so Sam makes everything in Clip Studio, and then whatever happens next is between him and God.
That's exactly right.
And then eventually everything exports into something that would just auto slurp up through the Stitch tool.
Yeah. There's always a pipeline. There must always be a pipeline. Well, that's all the time we have for this week. We'd like to thank our producers, Fat Bard and Sampa DaCosta, for putting the podcast together. And thanks to our community moderators who keep our Discord running. To get more involved in the Butterscotch community, you could just go to podcast.bscotch.net, where we have links to the community Discord, a way for you to donate to support the podcast, and links to the archives. And if you haven't yet, head on over to Steam and give Crashlands 2 a wish list. It'll help boost it up the charts and help it have a successful launch, and we would appreciate it. So thank you all for listening. We'll see you next week.